Chapter 1 With a Wise Man of the East. Some years ago I wandered for a while through sun-baked Oriental lands, intent on discovering the last remnants of that mystical East about which most of us often hear, but which few of us ever find. During those journeyings I met an unusual man who quickly earned my profound respect and received my humble veneration. For although he belonged by tradition to the class of wise men of the East, a class which has largely disappeared from the modern world, he avoided all record of his existence and disdained all efforts to give him publicity. Time rushes onward like a roaring stream, bearing the human race with it and drowning our deepest thoughts in its noise. Yet this sage sat apart, quietly ensconced upon a grassy bank, and watched the gigantic spectacle with a calm, Buddha-like smile. The world wants its great men to measure their lives by its puny foot rule. But no rule has yet been devised which will take their full height, for such men, if they are really worth the name, derive their greatness not from themselves but from another source. And that source stretches far away into the infinite. Hidden here and there in stray corners of Asia and Africa, a few seers have preserved the traditions of an ancient wisdom. They live like ghosts as they guard their treasure. They dwell outwardly apart, this spectre race, keeping alive the divine secrets which life and fate have conspired to confide in their care. The hour of our first meeting is still graven on my memory. I met him unexpectedly. He made no attempt at formal introduction. For an instant, those sibylline eyes gazed into mine, but all the stained earth of my past and the white flowers that had begun to spring up on it were alike seen during that one twinkle of the bell of time. There, in that seated being, was a great impersonal force that read the scales of my life with better sight than I could ever hope to do. I had slept in the scented bed of Aphrodite, and he knew it. I had also lured the gnomes of thought to mine for strange enchanted gold in depths of my spirit. He knew that too. I felt too that if I could follow him into his mysterious places of thought, all my miseries would drop away, my resentments turn to toleration, and I would understand life, not merely grumble at it. He interested me much, despite the fact that his wisdom was not a kind which is easily apparent, and despite the strong reserve which encircled him. He broke his habitual silence only to answer questions upon such recondite topics as the nature of man's soul, the mystery of God, the strange powers which lie unused in the human mind, and so on. But when he did venture to speak, I used to sit enthralled as I listened to his soft voice under a burning tropic sun or pale crescent moon. For authority was vested in that calm voice, and inspiration gleamed in those luminous eyes. Each phrase that fell from his lips seemed to contain some precious fragment of essential truth. The theologians of a stuffier century thought the doctrine of man's original sin, but this adept taught the doctrine of man's original goodness. In the presence of this sage one felt security and inward peace. The spiritual radiations which emanated from him were all-penetrating. I learnt to recognize in his person the sublime truths which he taught, while I was no less hushed into reverence by his incredibly sainted atmosphere. He possessed a deific personality which defies description. I might have taken shorthand notes of the discourses of this sage. I might even print the record of his speech. But the most important part of his utterances, the subtle and silent flavor of spirituality which emanated from him, can never be reported. If, therefore, I burn literary incense before his bust, it is but a mere fraction of the tribute I ought to pay him. One could not forget that wonderful, pregnant smile of his, with a hint of wisdom and peace won from suffering and experience. He was the most understanding man I have ever known. You could be sure always of some words from him that would soothe your way a little, and that word always verified what your deepest feeling told you already. And yet, in its settled moments, his face bore an expression of deep melancholy. Still, it was a resigned melancholy, not the bitter, rebellious kind one often sees. You knew that at some period of his past he had suffered some inexpressible agony. The words of this sage still flame out in my memory like beacon lights. "I pluck golden fruit from rare meetings with wise men," wrote transatlantic Emerson in his diary, and it is certain that I plucked whole basketfuls during my talks with this man. Our best philosophers of Europe could not hold a candle to him. But the inevitable hour of our parting came. Time turned round this old globe of ours, and I went back to Europe, busied myself with one thing and another, and quite lately prepared to return to the East once more. I purposed no less a thing than an exploration right across Asia, an exploration that would continue my old quest of that last surviving exponents of genuine Oriental wisdom and magic. I hoped to wander through the yellow deserts of Egypt and among the wisest sheiks of Syria, to mingle with the vanishing fakirs of remote Iraq villages, to question the old Sufi mystics of Persia in mosques with graceful, bulbous domes and tapering minarets, to witness the marvels performed by yogi magicians under the purple shadows of Indian temples, to confer with the wonder-working lamas of Nepal and the Tibetan border, to sit in the Buddhistic monasteries of Burma and Ceylon, and to engage in silent telepathic conversation with century-old yellow sages in the Chinese hinterland and the Gobi Desert. My kit was almost packed, my last few papers were being put in order, and I was nearly ready to leave. I turned my face away from the crowded streets of the great city in which I lived. "London is a roost for every bird," wrote shrewd Disraeli, and I must be one who is somewhat old-fashioned. I like the quiet London of the 18th century streets and dignified old rail-in squares, and I regard them as welcome bases in a prevailing desert of noisy modernity. I see the satin-coated and knee-breeched ghosts of a past century when I walk around the pleasant grassy squares at night. I dislike the London which provides a stage for countless motors and hurrying people. I am fond of the London which hovers around the wide Thames at places like Rotherhithe and Wapping, for there, among the picturesque old wharves and barnacled quays, I stroll in an atmosphere faintly redolent of the sea, and I watch romantic-looking craft come and go on the river. I prefer to see a weather-beaten barge take its tranquil way down the Thames to a painted demon of a lorry pursuing its nerve-wracking, noisy route along the streets. And so this fateful day I sought a few hours' escape among certain friendly trees in the green countryside. I found them after traversing rolling chalk hills, winding lanes, and quiet beech woods. My eyes became half-closed, the harsh, confused noises of thronged towns had faded, and I was once more sitting in almost tranced stillness. It was not long before the old habit reasserted itself, and I expectantly drew out a worn notebook. I sat down in the lush green grass with a pen in hand and a book upon the knee, seeking to cast my net upon the delicate thoughts and beautiful moods which swim across the heart when all is still. It is in such solitary rural silence that I have often felt more at ease than in many a city drawing-room, and it is when companioned by such silvery beaches that I have often felt a more beautiful and sincere presence than with many human beings. It was the mellow autumn season, and all around me were the gold and green tinted leaves which lie down to die in such profusion when the life of the year begins to fail. The late afternoon sun alone shone generously upon everything around. The hours slipped past one another. The soft murmur of a few insects rose and died away as they flew through the air. But still the pen lay motionless between my fingers. One waits beside the silent shore of the mind for the coming of exalted moods whose fragile bodies are as gossamer. So soft are they that if one does not cast one's net aright, the rough chords of mortal tongue will slay the tiny wanderers with brutal touch. And so shy are they that one must sometimes wait long before the first timorous alien will venture into the net. But once a few captives have been gathered together, the reward descends rich upon one's own heart. In this spiritual element lie all the fragrant hopes of man, waiting like so many unplucked flowers for the soft hands which will garner them for a sightless people. These visitations of a loftier mood provide one with jewels for one's writings. In such sacred moments one touches the infinite. Sentences form themselves from the ether. One hardly knows how. Phrases disengage themselves from the skies and descend upon this sublunary world to feed one's pen. One must yield to these mysterious moods and not resist them. Thus does one render oneself worthy to become a mediator between the immortal gods and the frail, forgetful man. Today, however, I thought that I had waited in vain, and so closed the book and replaced the pen in my pocket. Soon the strange hour of twilight would shade the face of time, and then the soft feet of night would creep into the halls of day. Thereafter I would rise up from the fallen trunk where I had moodily pondered in vain, and with slow steps I would stumble homewards, over the darkened fields, and through woods over which ripe leaves had carpeted a rich brown. But instead there came a strange pause, and a film fell across my eyes, making the sense of sight oblivious of the earth world around me. The ichor leapt in my veins, flinging the sluggish blood aside, while a great yellow light seemed to shine within my heart. A hand seemed to touch my shoulder, so I raised my head and looked upwards, to find a benignant face bent over me. And he who I had known in the Orient, the wise man of the East, appeared before me, his grave bearded face as clear, as recognizable as though it were there in the flesh. Certainly he came to me with a tread which was as silent as the fall of fresh dew. I made the humble obeisance of my heart in veneration and greeting. His strange eyes turned remonstratingly upon me. He said gently, "My son, it is not well. Hast thou forgotten compassion? Shalt thou go forth and add to thy store of knowledge while others starve for the crumbs of wisdom? Wilt thou commute with the divine ones when there are those who look for God but perceive only the impassable barrier of the sky? When there are those who throw their prayers to a void which returns no answer? Stay thy feet, if needs be, but forget not thy fellows in distress. Leave not for the lands of waving palms until thou hast well regarded these words. May peace be ever with thee." And thereupon, without another word, he passed out of my vision, as silently and as mysteriously as he had appeared. When I became aware of my environment, I could barely see the trees again, for it had grown dark. The light had faded out of the day, and the scintillating stars were coming to birth in the sky. The first wan rays of the moon threw a few gleams upon the fallen tree. I could see little else. I arose and made the homeward journey. As I walked through the grass, with stick trembling in my hand, and with thoughts fastened upon the august utterance which had fallen from those reproving lips, I suddenly realized that the accusation was perfectly true. I had considered none save myself. I had followed the light of the star of truth, the star which attracted me most out of the whole sky, but I had followed it for myself alone. I left my countryside musings and returned to town, entering with a strange awe its streets so canopied by the darkness of night. Here were millions of beings compelled by the demands of society to go to bed at the behest of a clock and to rise at the ringing of a noisy alarm bell. Yes, I had supped alone, feasting on divine verities that can never die. Would not my own soul grow lean and small if I disdained those who were hungry for that which I had taken freely out of the seemingly impenetrable silence of the sky? Could one rest with the mere recovery of these truths for oneself? There are other people in this populous world, and among them a few who might welcome such thoughts as I could give them. The world of fact has little sympathy for the man who stands aloof and keeps his soul free for visions in which it does not share. And the world is right. We who are seers and mystics have to draw the last crystal drop of water out of the well of vision. But with that begins our duty, stern and strict, of offering the unfamiliar drink to the first wayfarer thirsty enough to accept it. Not for ourselves alone, but for all alike does Neptune cast his magic trident over the deep places of the soul and show us his glamorous pictures therein. If the privilege of sitting at the feet of the forgotten, but none the less potent gods, is indeed high, then the travail of carrying their message to an unheeding yet suffering people is just as high, just as noble. Perhaps no man's mind is so clothed in ugliness that a few faint gleams of hidden beauty do not trouble him now and again, and cause him to raise his head a little towards the stars, sometimes in perplexity at the meaning of it all, sometimes in wonder at the ceaseless harmony of the spheres. Forget not thy fellows in distress, my strange visitant had told me. What then could I do? I could not tarry overmuch in this western country and neglect my trans-Asiatic expedition, for which the pressure of fate and the pull of inclination had conspired to smooth my path. How then, for the sake of one's fellows, could one assume the prophetic mantle and hat and go out to spread what one had learnt to regard as truth? And then the answer rose up clearly in my mind in the shape of a self-evident thought. I would set down some of the things which life had taught me, and then leave the written record behind. I could but call at the doors of men and deliver a few thoughts which had helped me, and then I must withdraw and leave the latter to do their mission. I could not undertake to play the advocate on their behalf. Whoever would receive them readily should surely be helped too, but whoever rejected them might find elsewhere his meat and drink. Could my record but meet with a man at some crucial troubled moment of his life, who knew how far it might guide him towards the eternal good? I would try to put into the words of that book a wisdom learnt from dearly bought experience. There would be sentences that would hold the marrow of days spent in mourning, and phrases would fall from my pen which would embalm tears that once fell from my eyes. I would do all this because I should like those pages to carry healing and consolation to those who are in present distress, to show them that man contains rare and unexpected resources within himself, wherewith to meet and overcome the hard trials which few can escape. But it need not therefore be a joyless book, for it would also hold the lingering echoes of many happy hours spent in sublime peace. It would more than hint at the ecstatic enjoyment of diviner states which are open to man. No, it need not be a joyless book, indeed it could not be. The flowers must drop petals, one by one. The moon waxes, and must wane. Even the lark's fine song must one day be stilled. But I have found a land where strange flowers grow, and grow forever. Where the sky's light is never less, and where all things sing in an immortal music that has not ceased since the beginning of time. Thus, the pages which follow took their genesis. If they seem to consist of little more than a collection of scattered thoughts loosely tied together, I must ask the pardon and indulgence of the reader. For I gather my written thoughts in the motley. They are always disjointed and come only in fragments. I stand ashamed before the facile orations of other men, whose sequences flow like a stream of oil. This halting utterance of mine I attribute to a natural impulse of my mind to enter into a state of rest rather than to enter into a state of activity. There is a war in my heaven every time I take up my pen, which has accepted the limitations with which it was born and does not aspire towards a better technique. It will be observed that there is very little argument in these pages, but very much that will provoke it. The reason will be plain to those who have mastered the mystery of Christ's saying, "Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven." But it will be hard to grasp by the ultra-clever, the super-shrewd, and the ego-centered. For intellect is but a machine. It makes a splendid servant, yet a bad master. We are apt to criticize where we do not comprehend. Where something here indited appears difficult to grasp or seems superficially obscure, the reader should nevertheless ponder upon it until he reaches the point of discovery. If I can stimulate him to discover his own true thought, I render him a better service than if I teach him. This age reads in order to kill time, but a few wise ones read in order to make time alive. I hope the latter will find this book. Crusading holds no charms for me, and agitating would be but a torment. Rather would I be a stimulator, stimulating others not to join some cult, but to think for themselves, and to think deeper than the conventional men of our time. It is only by thinking a matter out for oneself that we can understand it best. I cannot hope to convey my understanding to you, but I can hope to arouse that faculty within you which will give you perception. Hence, these writings do not formulate any fixed system which you have to swallow by an act of faith. They aim at being suggestive. They try to challenge you to think for yourself. They provide you with mental nuts to crack in the form of unusual questions. You can create a new system of ideas for yourself by musing upon these pages, but it will be your own system, not another's. Such thoughts as these may begin by startling you, but they may end by stimulating you. I do not know. I am not writing for the benefit of the man who has already put up the shutters of his mind and firmly fixed them in case the light of a few new ideas might stream in and disturb his sleep. I am writing for the few who amid the modern muddle of bewildering doctrines have placed their feet upon tentative ground because there seems to be no safer place in sight. Those who look for plenty of facts in this book will not find them. There are thousands of books which will give them all the facts they can ever want. And better still, there is the voluminous Book of Life, which they can always consult, and in which they can always verify every statement I have made. My aim has been to give the soul of all these facts. I have tried to sum up in one flash of a sentence what lies behind 100,000 facts, events, and experiences. Because I spent the years stretching my philosophic soul upon the rack until I found the truth, I am in no mood to listen to polished platitudes nor to write them. Yet really there is nothing new in the essential thought behind these pages, though it does not matter so much whether these are new or whether they are neglected thoughts, as whether they are true thoughts. Medieval men like Thomas A. Kempis and Jacob Boehme communicated the same thought in earlier centuries, but they communicated it in a form which makes no great appeal to me and will make even far less appeal to my contemporaries. Yet they wrote out of a veridict experience which any man of the 20th century may duplicate if he will. Those who regard this experience as inconceivable at most and illogical at least should investigate before they snatch at such final conclusions. For I know that I have tried to tackle this difficult investigation of life in a scientific yet reverent spirit, to approach it with an impartial love of truth for its own sake, and not in order to confirm or refute any particular theories. That I should treat seriously of little known states of consciousness in this book may seem superstition to many, but it is true science to me. Those who can receive it in this light will find their faith rewarded by time, who will likewise pay their credulity with first-hand knowledge. My confidence stands serene and unshaken that I can make good my thesis against all comers, but only if they are prepared to undertake the same psychological experiments which I undertook. The thoughts I now give out did not come to me after long argument. They came after long experience. Whoever, therefore, would understand them aright must be willing to invite the same experience, and this will come readily enough if he is as keen on finding truth as he is on his other and more mundane affairs. If, therefore, I find the spiritual life no less substantial than the material one, so can every reader of this book. I possess no special privilege which other human beings do not possess. I can claim no magic gift which has been fought for by continued effort. What I have found within myself is precisely what anyone else, even a hardened Chicago gangster, may find in his own self too. If the phrases of this book are occasionally fervent and sometimes heated, this can be explained only because it is a transcript from life, not a collection of academical theories evolved amid a quiet cloister of Cambridge. Can no one be a good philosopher unless he writes coldly, as though he took no interest in his subject? Must his pages be pale and colorless? Must he carefully prune all emotional expressions out of them before he is safe reading? The critic cannot refute this work because it is based not upon my human intellectual opinions, but upon eternal truths as told as the starry heavens that greet our gaze at night. Truths that are embedded in both nature and man. They are there, but they must be dug out. This book is but one voice crying in the wilderness of this stricken world. There are others, and in many countries. The message it carries in these pages is simple yet subtle. It is a literary arrow drawn and disposed at a venture, but it is yet guided by a higher hand than mine. Fate, the needs of many persons who have written to me, and the expressed wish of this wise man of the East, one of my spiritual guides, have all conspired to thrust this work upon me. The book will find its way into the expectant hands of some men and women who care for truth, and it may serve them. I have endeavored to give faithful report to a voice which appears to be dumb in most men. Therefore I hope these printings will be not without some value to them. The fact that the millions of men and women around me are preoccupied with matters of another order invites me to remind them that they and their activities shall shortly or at length vanish from this globe, and that there is a way open to them leading to the eternal life, which is enduring treasure. Some will label me as of that dwindling crowd of dreamers who think to find a starry height in man. They will not be wrong, but I would beg them to realize that they can make my dream their own reality. The way I have followed may be aside from the common one, but it is not so far off that more cannot tread it also. If a foolish age calls us a band of mere dreamers, we are, at least, have the consolation of knowing that we dream while they sleep in dire spiritual unconsciousness. Others will ask, can this light be followed in the midst of present-day sorrows and sufferings? To them, I would say, This is precisely the time when its divine worth can best be proved. There are certain essential truths about life, certain fundamental and unalterable principles which govern living, which have been known to the wise of all ages, from the farthest antiquity till the present day. Healing can be found for all. No man is so broken, so oppressed by burdens of ill health, poverty, and unhappiness, but there is one way out of or around his problem, or, in the last resort, some way to bear it. This is so, this must be so, because all men exist within the universal mind which has brought this world into being, a mind which is perennially benevolent, unfathomably wise, and eternally peaceful. There are ugly things in the social life around us which may appear to contradict the latter statement, but the man who is willing to make the effort and unfold his spiritual insight will discover that the statement is a true one. All appearances to the contrary, the least result of continued effort along the lines laid down in this book will be that the practitioner will become established in the inner peace which must mark him out from his fellows as a man of envied poise. And after he has found this peace, other people will come to him, both young and old, and question him for the secret which seems to have eluded them. And then he will turn, and then he, in his turn, will show them the way.